More players accepted the qualifying offer than ever before, reshaping the free agent market. We had notable DFAs around Major League Baseball, and the New York Mets added a top prospect to their 40-man roster. A jam-packed show today with Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to talk about all the latest news around Major League Baseball. In the first segment, going to talk about all the players that accepted the qualifying offer and those who rejected it, including Edwin Diaz. Second segment, we're going to talk about notable DFAs around baseball, including Frankie Montas, which allowed the Mets to add top prospect Nick Morabito to their 40-man roster. And then in the final segment, we're going to go through Jeff Passan's rumor column, talking about everything he is hearing around the game right now in both the trade market and free agency. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. All right, so let's start off with the qualifying offer. For those of you who are not familiar, the qualifying offer is a team's ability to tender a one-year contract for their free agent. And this year, that number is set at $22.025 million. This is a way for that free agent to return to their club. But if they decide not to accept the qualifying offer, they hit the market with draft pick compensation attached. So this incentivizes teams to extend qualifying offers because they can recoup some assets for their own free agents who they're unable to retain. Typically, players do not accept the qualifying offer because once they get to the open market, they're at least likely to get what they would be turning down on the QO on a one-year deal as an absolute fallback. And a lot of times, even if they don't get that long-term deal they want, they can typically get multiple years and get a little more security than that one-year qualifying offer where you are really just betting on yourself to have a big season. The most players that have ever accepted the qualifying offer in the past is back in 2015 when the qualifying offer started. That was 3 players. This is the most we've ever seen. Usually it's one free agent, maybe 2 who accepts it. I think part of the reason why there was so much uncertainty for these guys where they decided to accept the qualifying offer is due to the impending lockout, the end of this CBA, and maybe they just think, let's play out a one-year deal, rebuild our value or build our value up as much as we can, wait to see what happens with this new CBA, and then next offseason, get the long-term deal. It's also circumstantial where you had 2 starting pitchers who would rather bet on themselves in the place that they're comfortable than trying to do it somewhere else. And then you had 2 position players who probably never should have been extended the qualifying offer in the first place, unless these teams really just wanted these guys back on a one-year deal. So let's start off with the starting pitchers. Shota, Imanaga, and Brandon Woodruff both accepted the qualifying offer for similar yet different reasons. For both of them, it is the attraction of staying where they're comfortable, pitching on a one-year deal for a competitive team, and then being able to hit the market without the qualifying offer attached. Shota Imanaga was a wild situation with this contract after this season. The Cubs could have opted into 3 years, $57 million, something that seemed like a no-brainer when Shota Imanaga finished in the top 5 of Cy Young voting in his rookie season in 2024, but he fell off in the second half, had a bad playoff run, so the Cubs declined that option. Then it goes to Imanaga. He's got a $15 million player option that then triggered. He declines it. The Cubs then say, you know what, hold on. We're going to give you the qualifying offer so that when you leave us, we can get draft picks. And then Imanaga says, nope, I'm going to take that qualifying offer. So the Cubs are probably kicking themselves because I think they would have preferred to clear the salary and just invest in other pitchers on the market. Now maybe they only had 1 starting pitcher in free agency instead of 2. This is the secondary one that I guess they're adding So I think it's interesting how this might impact the Cubs spending, as they've been pretty tight with that wallet in recent seasons. Now, Brandon Woodruff is interesting, not necessarily for him as a candidate for the Mets to sign, but more for his teammate that the Mets may look to trade for, and that is Freddie Peralta. Jeff Passan, in that rumor column that we're going to talk about in the final segment, had mentioned earlier in the day that there was rival executives that felt that it was more likely that Freddie Peralta would get dealt if Brandon Woodruff opted in. This is kind of twofold. On one sense, the Brewers' payroll just went up a lot. Brandon Woodruff has never made more than like $10 million in change in a given season. Now he's going to make $22 million. That's a lot of money for the Brewers. Freddie Peralta is not making a lot. He's making $8 million, but on the Brewers, that is still a sizable salary. It's not the salary, though, that they'd be looking to move. It's what they could get back in a Freddie Peralta trade. And before Woodruff opted in, if he left too, now you are just dealing with a rotation that is a bunch of young pitchers. Like Jacob Mizorowski could be awesome, but how much you're going to count him to be an ace in year two? You have so many guys that are just unproven in that rotation to be able to headline it. That's why Freddie Peralta is so important. Brandon Woodruff coming back does ease a little bit of that burden on Peralta if they both stay, but he also gives them a potential ace who can fill that role if they trade Peralta. So it'll be interesting to see if what the Brewers are saying is true, which is that they're not trading him right after Woodruff opted in. The Athletic ran a story tonight on the Brewers' decision with Peralta, and both the owner, Mark Attanasio, and the president, Matt Arnold, said they are not trading Peralta. Or they didn't say they're not trading Peralta. They said that the Woodruff decision is independent of the Peralta decision, and they are very excited about their rotation in 2026. So we'll see what exactly that means. Now, you look at the other two guys that accepted the qualifying offer. Trent Grisham takes the one-year deal with the Yankees, which is very interesting because Grisham theoretically would have got a 3 or 4 year deal, but being attached to those draft picks when his defense declined in 2025, and he has a very little offensive track record prior to the 2025 season, it made this sort of an easy accept, in my opinion, for Grisham, where you take a contract at a place where you just had a career year. You're going to make more on this contract when it comes to AAV. It's only a 1 year deal, but to make $22 million compared to hitting the market and maybe getting 15. So you're going to make more in this upcoming season, and he's betting on himself to have another big year, and then he gets to hit the market without a qualifying offer attached and with now a 2-year sample of him being this new slugger that can hit you 30 home runs if that happens again. What's interesting about this is now the Yankees a little more squeezed on their roster when it comes to having room for Cody Bellinger. They got Aaron Judge. They got Trent Grisham. They got Jason Dominguez. They have Spencer Jones in the minor leagues. They got Stanton at DH. They got Ben Rice at first base. They can find at bats for Bellinger between first base, pushing somebody at DH, whether it's having Dominguez DH or again Rice to DH with Bellinger at first. There are ways to get him in the lineup, obviously, but you now have a $22 million slot on your roster that's going to Grisham that theoretically could have gone to Bellinger. He probably makes a little bit more than that, but it is interesting to think maybe Cody Bellinger becomes a little bit more available because Trent Grisham returns to the Yankees. And then the final one is Gleyber Torres. Gleyber Torres accepts the qualifying offer, which removes the top starting second baseman from the market. All you're left with as far as starting second baseman is Jorge Polanco, and then you have Willie Castro, who is more of a utility man anyway. Luis Rengifo had a horrible season. So you're really left with very few options if you want a second baseman. Granted, if Bo Bichette is moving to second, that's a different tier of a free agent. He would clearly be the top free agent second baseman. But the reason why I find this interesting is now Jeff McNeil becomes even more attractive on the trade market. You have Brandon Lowe, Jeff McNeil, and Brendan Donovan, who suddenly, if you're looking for a second baseman, I think you're going to the trade market before you're signing Jorge Polanco at 33 years old or 32 years old off of a career year, who's not a good defender at second base. Not that Brandon Lowe is either, but for Brendan Donovan and Jeff McNeil, these guys are some of the best all-around options that are available. And I do think if the Mets eat that money, not all of it, but if they ate $7.75 million and they made Jeff McNeil a $10 million player for this upcoming season, I really think that they could get a team to bite, or $8 million in salary for this year, and then the $2 million that it'll take to buy him out of a club option for 2027. Edwin Diaz declined the qualifying offer, one of 9 that did. You also add Kyle Tucker, Kyle Schwarber. Let's see if I can do this without my notes, because I never did take notes on who declined it. So Tucker, Schwarber, Diaz, Bo Bichette, and then the 5 other pitchers: Ranger Suarez, Dylan Cease, Michael King, Framber Valdez, and Zach Allen. There you go. Those guys are all now free agents with the draft pick compensation attached. In the next segment, we're going to talk about notable DFAs around Major League Baseball, including Frankie Montas, who made room for Mets top prospect Nick Morabito to be added to the 40-man roster. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season's here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you're going to get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, you put down $5. If it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little bit of something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel is going to make the game day experience so much better. It's quick, it's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get to that next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're within 100, getting closer and closer. I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. The biggest news item of the day for the New York Mets is that Nick Morabito was added to the 40-man roster and Frankie Montas was DFA'd. Now, this puts an end to one of the worst signings in Mets franchise history and the worst move that David Stearns has made in his 2 years running the club. A 2-year, $34 million deal. In year 1 of that contract, Frankie Montas made 7 starts and 2 relief appearances and pitched to a 6.28 ERA. Now they're paying him $17 million to go away. Montas got Tommy John surgery at the end of the season. It was very unlikely that he could return this year, and if he did, it would be at the absolute tail end of the season. So just get rid of him. You clear him from your roster. You don't have to think about him anymore. You don't have to think about that money on your books. It's dead money. It is what it is. You move on. There was a lot of other players the Mets could have DFA'd and probably will throughout this offseason as they add free agents. They have a full 40-man right now. I was thinking maybe Jared Young could go, and then there's countless of arms that could at some point be taken off the roster to make room for others who are going to be added on. But let's talk about the guy that just got added to the 40, Nick Morabito. One of the Mets' top prospects. Morabito is a really interesting player. He was just outside my top 10. Told you guys this week we're going to get to prospects 11 through 20 in my list of the top 20 prospects in the Mets system. He is high on that end of the list for the New York Mets, in my opinion. Some might have him in the top 10 prospects. He is a very good player. Second round pick by the Mets in 2022. Center fielder, was a shortstop, converted out to center field. He is a 70 grade runner, so great speed out there, good instincts in the outfield. He's probably going to be able to play an above average center field at the big league level, and he'll be good in all three corners of the outfield. He'll be good in all 3 outfield spots. I think most likely you're looking at a 4th outfielder outcome, but you never know. You don't want to just tag a player with that and say he's never going to ascend beyond it, because look, in the Arizona Fall League, he tore the cover off the ball. 362 batting average, 450 on base, 464 slug, stole 16 bases on 19 attempts in 17 games. Best outcome for Morabito, he's a starting center fielder that can bat leadoff because he's getting on base at a high enough clip, hitting for a high average, stealing bases, and just being a spark plug at the top of your lineup. Again, more likely outcome is a 4th outfielder, but those are valuable players. The New York Mets have enjoyed Tyrone Taylor's services the last couple of years. Imagine you had that level of defense with a guy that can hit a little bit. That's what you're hoping for with Nick Morabito, and now that he's on the 40-man roster, he is in play in spring training to make the team. Likely, probably not. Carson Bench clearly ahead of him. And the reason why Carson Bench was not added to the 40-man roster is the Mets did not have to. Basically, how this works, there is a Rule 5 draft that'll happen during the winter meetings. And the Rule 5 draft was put in place so that teams like the Dodgers, who always have a deep farm, but also a deep MLB roster, they can't have these guys who are just constantly blocked, who are not getting added to the 40-man roster, which is when you are, a big leaguer officially. But they're definitely worthy of being that. They're just on a team with a stacked 40. This puts an obstacle in the way of teams from just stashing prospects away and never letting them see the light of day, where another team can say, I'm going to pick that player, and he's going to be on my team, my MLB team, for the upcoming season. Now, if you can keep that player on your roster all year, and even if they get hurt, that's fine. It's just a matter of you never decide that you have to drop them and put them in the minor leagues. They become your player. And so for Nick Morabito, who could be a fourth outfielder in the big leagues, any team can say, you know what, we'll take Nick Morabito on, and we have a chance to poach one of the top prospects in the Met system and hold on to the guy, and then he could be a part of our big league bench for 6 years, and best case scenario, he could be our starting center fielder. So made all the sense in the world for the New York Mets to protect Nick Morabito. I'm glad that they did, and I'm also glad that Frankie Montas is gone. Notable DFAs around Major League Baseball outside of Montas. JJ Bleday is an interesting one. He had a breakout season in 2024. This was a former Marlin. He was their number 4 overall pick back in 2019. Had a breakout season with the Athletics in 2024 when he hit 20 homers, had a 762 OPS while playing out in center field. Was not a good center fielder, though. Very bad defensive center fielder, but he's still an interesting outfielder who could play center, who is now on the market. The Mets could claim him if they wanted to. Maybe if they decided that it'd be better to have Bleday on their 40 than Ji-Hwan Bae, they can make that move. And honestly, I think I'd prefer Bleday. Not that he's going to be good enough defensively, but just a guy that can maybe hit for you. And if somebody goes down, especially in the corner outfield spots, you just have another option. He still has a minor league option. So if the Mets claimed him, they can still stash him in AAA this year. So I think he's just a name to watch. Colin Holderman is a fun one to mention because Mets fans might remember Colin Holderman was traded for Daniel Vogelbach in the 2023 season at the deadline there. And Holderman had some really good seasons with the Pirates. A lot of people, actually wasn't the 2020, it was the 2022 season. Is that 2023? 2023 was when everybody hated the Vogelbach trade because he was not very good. And Holderman was great at that point for the Pirates. 2024, he had a 3.16 ERA in 51 1/3 innings pitched, was a legitimate late inning reliever. Last year was brutal, 7.01 ERA, but he is a big guy, former Met. Maybe you can tweak the arsenal, get him right. There's still 2 options that he has. So if the Mets were to claim Colin Holderman, he would be right in that mix of the AAA, MLB shuttle squad. So just another name to mention, especially because a lot of Mets fans are very familiar with Colin Holderman. Last one that I wanted to discuss was Nathaniel Lowe, who was DFA'd by the Red Sox. I talked about this on the show prior to that decision today because the Red Sox are in the running for Pete Alonso, and they had 2 first basemen on their roster, Nathaniel Lowe and Tristan Casas. Now, Lowe, if he was just under a contract that was more attributable to what he produced in this previous season, where he had a brutal time with the Nationals, ends up with the Red Sox in the final couple months of the season, was great, hit 280, 370 on base, didn't have much power, but high average and got on base at a good clip and actually played a better first base for Boston than he did in Washington, where he was awful defensively. If he was just getting paid off of that season, you're talking maybe a $3 or $4 million player, but how the arbitration system works, you build up over the years. So because he was making $10 million last year, he was due for a raise to make something close to $12 million, which was a no-brainer DFA for the Red Sox to open up some spending and also open up some opportunities at first base if they do decide to move on from Tristan Casas or make Casas a DH first baseman, pairing with Pete Alonso. They now have more flexibility to do that. So just noting that Lowe did get DFA'd after all. There's still more decisions to be made. The deadline, the non-tender deadline, I believe, is on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So a couple days left for teams to make those decisions. We will do a non-tender show likely on Friday. who will get non-tendered by the New York Mets, if anybody, at this stage. So we'll go through all of that at a later date. Final segment today. We got a Jeff Passan rumor roundup. He went through his intel and everything going on in Major League Baseball right now behind the scenes, what he is hearing in free agency, what he's hearing when it comes to the trade market. So we're going to go through all of those rumors, especially the ones that relate to the Mets here in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service. We get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways and get a lineup graphic sent to your phone each day during the regular season, so you always have that lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, if you do a little Control F on the ESPN article that Jeff Passan wrote today, you'll find that the Mets came up 17 times in his wide-ranging story. First reference was as a potential free agent landing spot for Kyle Tucker. Then they had another passing reference about the Mets being a team that could sign Bo Bichette. This is just covering your bases. The Mets are a big market team that could theoretically sign either guy. I don't know if I see a clear-cut fit for either one. For Bichette, probably be as your second baseman, because obviously you have Lindor at short. You got Jet Williams coming through the farm system that could be your second baseman of the future, but maybe you trade Jet for a starting pitcher and you sign Bo Bichette. That could make some sense. Kyle Tucker feels like you'd have to move Brandon Nimmo for Kyle Tucker to make sense. Did a full show on Brandon Nimmo yesterday and why I don't think it's realistic to expect that he gets moved. So we'll see what happens there. We're going to need a lot more reporting that the Mets are really in on Kyle Tucker for me to be kind of bought in on the idea that they might spend $300+ million, even close to $400+ million for Tucker after all they shelled out from Juan Soto. The third reference was when we got to the Pete Alonso section of the notes column. He linked the Boston Red Sox, the Reds, the Orioles, and of course the Mets as fits for Pete Alonso. Sort of interesting to think of Pete Alonso in a Reds uniform because he would put up massive numbers at Citizens Bank. He would be such a huge difference maker for that lineup. But Pete Alonso wants to contend. Does he view the Reds as a contender? Baltimore, they just made a huge trade. Very shocking deal that just happened late in the night here, where Grayson Rodriguez, who was once one of, if not the top pitching prospect in baseball for the Orioles, he has 4 years left in team control, but he hasn't pitched since the end of the 2024 season. I believe it's a shoulder that has really caused him a lot of problems, and his health is so uncertain that the Orioles just cashed in 4 years of Grayson Rodriguez for 1 year of Taylor Ward. Taylor Ward hit 36 home runs and drove in over 100 this past season for the Angels, a monster season. So it does help the Orioles a lot. I don't know if that takes them out of the running for Pete Alonso, if they ever were in the running for Pete Alonso. But again, the Red Sox mentioned as a landing spot. I still think that is the team that is the most threatening to pull Pete Alonso from the Mets. Now, Passan lists the Mets as a fit for Munetaka Murakami as well as Kazuma Okamoto. You can find last week I did a podcast breaking down the international market where I talked about both of those guys and their fit with the Mets. I don't really love either, particularly Murakami for the price tag, although the one thing that I could maybe get my head around is the Mets trying to create more of a blueprint in Japan. And so maybe that's where Murakami comes into play. And if they can actually get the most out of him, I mean, the upside is a three true outcome hitter like Kyle Schwarber, who's going to draw his walks, hit a bunch of home runs, but also strike out a ton. We'll see. I still think Pete Alonso makes more sense than any of these guys. Then we get to the starting pitching market. The Mets are seen as one of the top teams to look at these free agents like Dylan Cease, Framber Valdez, and Tatsuya Ime from the international side of things. They're also in the market for a top closer. Passan says the Mets want Diaz back, but they might not want him as much as other teams or players. And then he goes right into saying the Mets are in on Devin Williams. They are mulling the opportunity to sign Diaz and Williams to head up a bullpen in need of a total restructuring. Passan also mentions that Ryan Helsley is not coming back to the Mets, but to sit on that little tidbit about Diaz and Williams, that would be amazing. And I almost wonder, depending on how Edwin Diaz's market is materializing, what teams are interested. Could the Mets put pressure on Edwin by jumping the market on Devin Williams? Then you ensure that you have a closer if Edwin Diaz walks, and then you try to get him to come back on your terms in a better bullpen where he has a set of man that's better than any he has had when he's in a Mets uniform. Now, Devin Williams didn't have a great season with the Yankees, but the underlying metrics would tell us his stuff is still really good. He should be a good pitcher moving forward. And obviously, there is that past history between Devin Williams, a former Brewer, and David Stearns, who, when he was the president of the Brewers, said, Devin Williams is so good, I'm going to trade Josh Hader in the middle of the season, and we're going to be just fine. Didn't work out that way for the Brewers that year. But ultimately, Devin Williams makes a lot of sense for the New York Mets. If they don't sign Edwin Diaz, I would expect that Devin Williams is the Mets closer next year. And if he pitches the way he has in the past, I mean, there was a good 3-year period there where Devin Williams is arguably the best reliever in baseball. So I would not be completely devastated if that was the result of this offseason, assuming you insulated Williams with a lot of good arms in that bullpen and potentially another closer type, just in case he has a repeat of his last season in New York with the Yankees, which was not very good. Obviously, I still want Edwin Diaz above any other reliever, but Devin Williams is definitely an interesting arm. And then if you sign Pete Alonso, you can make those two guys teammates, which would lead to some interesting back and forth in the first day of spring training this year. Now, the Mets are listed as the perfect fit by Jeff Passan for Tarik Skubal if he's traded, but the market is still split on whether he'll be moved. The Tigers are certainly presenting themselves as a buyer this offseason that's trying to contend with Skubal, but that could also be posturing. So I would not rule it out entirely, although it is still unlikely for the Mets to pull off a trade of that magnitude. They are just the team that is probably best prepared to make that type of a deal because their farm system's so deep, and they have the ability to extend Skubal if Boras will listen. I do think if you put $450 million on the table, he might listen. If you put the richest contract in MLB history for a starting pitcher on the table for Skubal, who might just want to sign a deal after winning 2 straight Cy Youngs and maybe doesn't want to have to bet on himself again, and for Boras, who could ink that contract before the CBA expires, I think there is a chance that you could trade and extend Skubal, even if everybody says it's impossible, it's going to hit the market. If you pay him top value, you can probably keep him. But regardless, that was just the note there that the Mets were the perfect fit on Skubal. Last part that was pretty interesting. Jeff Passan says the Mets are blowing up plenty. Then he says it's not just Luis Angel Acuna, Mark Vientos, or Brett Beatty. Brandon Nimmo and Jeff McNeil can also be had. So when it comes to the position player group, for one, interesting that Ronnie Mauricio's name is not mentioned. I wonder if that's because Mauricio has that option, and maybe the New York Mets are looking at Mauricio as the ultimate fallback plan. Maybe they like his upside more than Vientos and Beatty. You have the ability to park Ronnie Mauricio in AAA this upcoming season. You do not have that luxury with Acuna. You do not have that luxury with Vientos. That's why I think one of those two guys is more likely to be moved. I think you actually do still have that luxury with Brett Beatty. I think he actually still has an option, but Brett Beatty is probably a starting third baseman. So I do expect one of, if not both of Acuna and Vientos to be traded this offseason, just because it opens up some things. Although if you trade Nimmo and McNeil, you can probably keep all of the young guys. I still don't think Nimmo gets moved. Jeff McNeil, I'm really thinking it's going to happen here. It just depends on what your fallback then becomes at second base. If you trade Jeff McNeil and on opening day it's Ronnie Mauricio at third and Brett Beatty at second, I think something went wrong. I think if you trade Jeff McNeil, there has to be some other plan at second base, whether it is a stopgap, whether it is a trade where you're pulling off the crazy deal for Ketel Marte, or maybe you're trading for Brandon Lowe, who can be, a stopgap at second, but also a DH bat. So if, Acuna is hitting enough, he can be your second baseman. If Jeff Williams forces away the show, he can be your second baseman. There's a lot of ways the Mets can go about it. Also, you can just trade for Brendan Donovan and just get Jeff McNeil with like all the sliders turned up. Just a better version of Jeff McNeil, a younger version of Jeff McNeil with Brendan Donovan. Kodai Senga was mentioned in this piece. He is, quote, extremely available, and multiple executives expect him to be traded this winter as the Mets look to overhaul their rotation. If the Mets don't trade Kodai Senga, they're in a very tough spot because you got Clay Holmes. He's going to be a starting pitcher in your rotation. You have David Peterson. He is going to have a spot in your rotation. I know David Peterson had a rough finish to the year. Those guys are going to be there. To me, almost guaranteed. Nolan McLean is going to be in the rotation. So that's 3 spots. You also have Sean Manaea. He's not going to start the year in the bullpen. He is going to be in the rotation. That's 4 spots. You got Brandon Sproat. You got Jonah Tong. You got Jack Wenninger, who will start the season in AAA, as could Jonathan Santucci. You got Christian Scott coming off Tommy John. And you want to add guys. To me, if you don't trade Senga, you can only add 1 starting pitcher this offseason, and that's why he's on the market. And also, I think you can move Kodai Senga. Maybe that's something we have to do a full show on coming up here soon because there's a lot of buzz around this. But Kodai Senga does make a lot of sense to get traded at some point this offseason because you can still cash in on the upside and get out of the final 2 years of that deal. And 2 years, $28 million left owed to Kodai Senga on the market. Kodai Senga would get something like that. So I think you could trade him without even eating a dollar. Do you get anything back for Kodai Senga? Unlikely, unless it's part of a much larger trade. Let's just say, here's a good one. Sonny Gray is going to be traded according to Jeff Passan this offseason. He's going to waive his no-trade clause. Sonny Gray is owed $35 million this upcoming season. This could be a 1-for-1. We'll take Sonny Gray and take that $35 million contract off of your books in a year where you might be more rebuilding or retooling around your younger players in St. Louis. And we'll give you Kodai Senga, who, if he pitches up to his potential, can be a huge trade chip for you at the deadline. That's the type of trade that could make some sense. And Sonny Gray, a more dependable pitcher, you can expect him to make his starts. And even though he's coming off a little bit of a down year, all of the underlying data says he is still a very good arm, a guy that could be your number 2, your number 3. I wouldn't mind Sonny Gray at all. I really wouldn't. As the secondary starting pitcher that you add, going to cost a ton of money, but you clear 15 of Senga, then it's all right. I'm picking up Sonny Gray for $20 million for the 2026 season. And then I also went out and I traded for Freddie Peralta. I also went out and I signed Dylan Cease. Now, Dylan Cease, Nolan McLean, Sonny Gray, Clay Holmes, David Peterson. That's a rotation with Sean Manaea. I didn't even mention Manaea. That's a 6-man rotation. So we'll see what the Mets do, but interesting that Kodai Senga seems to now be likely to be moved. And the last piece of what I actually already discussed, which was that trade of Grayson Rodriguez for Taylor Ward. So that's all of the most pertinent details that surround the New York Mets in Jeff Passan's reporting. We'll continue to talk about any of the rumors that could take place in the coming days here. And also with the non-tender deadline coming soon, there could be other notable players that hit the market. So on Friday, we will do a non-tender show as far as who could get non-tendered. Maybe we'll start talking prospects on Friday, but for Thursday's show, I might do a Kodai Senga podcast, talking about these trade options, or again, I still want to get to those prospects. So expect at some point this week, a preview of the non-tender deadline, then a recap to the non-tender deadline. Expect my breakdown of the number 11 through 20 prospects in the Mets system, probably a show on Kodai Senga. And then next week, I'm going to have Aram Layton on to talk more prospects and break down why the Mets might have the best farm system in baseball. So a lot of exciting stuff coming on the show. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or first watch every day. And also thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.